So if AI slop is everywhere, why do we keep seeing the same brands win attention anyway? Because here's the thing nobody really wants to admit, right? The line between AI slop and human created slop is pretty thin. It's a little like that old Garmin line, right? The advertisement for their GPS and mapping service. You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. Same deal here. One person's AI slop or human created slop is another person's, well, scalable thought leadership. And the platforms, they don't much care which one you think you're making. So what are we going to do with that? So what's actually happening right now isn't so much a content quality crisis. It's a discovery physics shift, right? The way people find ideas, brands, and signals worth caring about is being completely rewired. Increasingly, your audience isn't waiting. They're swiping, they're filtering, they're muting, they're curating, they're building little velvet rope clubs around their attention, and there's a giant bouncer guarding the door, and guess what? You are not dressed quite right to get in. And that means the old B2B fantasy is finally dying. The idea that you say one thing everywhere, uniquely to everyone, and repetition magically does the rest. So in last week's part 1 of this series, I called it the monolith story. And I talked about how that's being replaced by something a little more dangerous, a little more interesting, and certainly more effective. And it's what I call the weirdness imperative. In a sea of beige content, the only thing that survives is emotional memory. Secret codes, secret handshakes, rituals that your community knows, inside jokes, distinctiveness that doesn't always make sense in a PowerPoint deck, but makes perfect sense to the people who feel it. But here's the hard part. Being distinctive, that's only half the battle. The other half is, well, where and how many? How do you scale distinction without turning your brand into some confused improv troupe wandering around trying to find the right stage? How do you earn trust from a conservative CMO on one hand and a DevOps engineer who breaks out in hives at the word marketing on the other? How do you do that when your audience isn't even reachable anymore because they've retreated into invitation-only rooms with that big bouncer? Well, most B2B marketers think the answer is better channel broadcasting or even more content, and it isn't. The answer is changing the physics of how your brand moves from community to community and, most importantly, stitches those stories together. This is the shift that I'm seeing, and it's a big one, from audience reach to audience gravity. You see, reach assumes people are waiting to be addressed. You just need to, well, reach them. Gravity assumes people are already somewhere they want to be and are hearing quite enough thank you very much, and so your job is to earn a place in the room so that they let you in and let you talk. You've seen what happens when brands get this wrong, right? Watch a company try to activate inside a tight Reddit community, for example, and just count the seconds before the famous Reddit immune system kicks in. One whiff of corporate gloss and you are gone. No appeal, no explanation, gone. So old school brand building ran on reach and frequency. Find the channel, insert the message, repeat until remembered. Today, attention is earned through resonance inside very specific context. The modern brand doesn't build one giant audience. It earns trusted positions inside many existing ones. Let me show you what that looks like in practice. Take e.l.f. Cosmetics. So e.l.f. doesn't optimize content. It actually just code switches identity into different kinds of identity. So on TikTok, it's not a brand, it's a native, right? It's there for the culture. Fast, musical, meme literate, entertainment first, cosmetics definitely second. The eyes, lips, face, song, well, it didn't just sell makeup, it taught people what the brand stood for. But then on Twitch, certainly something very different. The beauty act disappears entirely. Through its Game Up initiative, e.l.f. shows up as an advocate for women in gaming. No corporate cosplay, no pink washing. The story shifts from look good to you belong here. Then, in Discord or Roblox, well, e.l.f. stops performing and starts facilitating. Fans become insiders. The brand behaves like a moderator, not necessarily a megaphone. The message quietly changes to, this isn't for you, it's with you. Now contrast that with something like what Snowflake is doing on the B2B side. Snowflake, same thing. They tell one story, reducing friction in enterprise data, but play different roles depending on the room. On LinkedIn, Snowflake is a category architect, high altitude, market framing, long-term inevitability of a very serious solution. At events, It becomes the gravitational center of an ecosystem, customers, partners, proof that serious data work happens with you, the people. We are about the people. Inside customer and partner communities, the vision talk vanishes completely. Snowflake shows up as a senior teammate, technical teammate, cost control, architecture trade-offs, peer-to-peer credibility. Different roles, same integrity. This is audience gravity, the pull that forms when a brand consistently makes the rooms it enters more valuable, more interesting, or more alive. Now, to do this well, every distinctive plural brand needs 4 things. First, a singular core. Plural doesn't mean messy. It means anchored with a singular and then additive in specific ways to make it multiple. Your singular core isn't like a messaging pillar or a value proposition. It's your non-negotiable integrity. What do you believe as a brand? What do you refuse to do as a brand? And how your brand behaves when no one is watching. Think of it like a community passport. It lets you cross borders without sounding fake. It's how wildly different audiences can look at the very same expressions and go, I still trust them. Without this, plural just becomes fragmented, and that fragmentation is what we're all really allergic to. With it, variation, well, that becomes credibility. Second, rooms. Not demographics, not job titles, rooms. Yes, personas, ICPs if you like, but specifically the gatherings where those personas are open to selecting new members to come into that community. Self-selected communities with shared language, incentives, and beliefs, a private user group, a niche podcast, a brutal Reddit thread, a breakfast table at a conference. Every room has its own tempo and tolerance, and the fastest way to get rejected is to bring this mass market message designed for everybody into a specific room. Plural brands don't drag people out of rooms to experience their message. They add value to the room that they're in and do that well. Third, those expressions. Same truth, different dialect. In one room, trust becomes from being rigorous and boring. In another, it comes from being playful and skeptical. In a third, it might be coming from generosity and collaboration. Think of it like joining a jam session with a band, right? You don't walk in, drop a set list, and demand everybody follow you. No, you listen. You find the key. You earn the groove. Your values don't change. Your performance does. And finally, gravity. This is where the plural brand scales. Each win, whether it's a podcast, the unique ritual you set up with an email subscription, the co-created moment in an event, they become threads. And over time, the skill, the sophistication of the plural brand experiment is figuring out how all those threads weave together around a singular core. People don't recognize your brand because the slogan isn't identical anywhere. They recognize it because it just kind of seems to belong wherever it appears. And you won't do this perfectly. That's the point. And it gets to where we'll go next week, because here's the paradox waiting at the end of the road. In 2026, competence is a commodity. AI can simulate perfection, which means perfection starts to look synthetic, like that AI slop we just talked about. Flawlessness starts to feel kind of fake. Imperfection kind of feels more human. That's why the brands that win won't sound polished, they'll sound vulnerable. And in the next part of this series, I'll break down the brand pratfall protocol and how strategic flaws actually can increase trust. The link to this part 2 article is in the post, so until next week, just remember it's your stories. Go find all of them. Tell them to the right communities and tell them well. I'll see you next week.